If you have more to say about New York, dropping south through Pennsylvania and through and into Virginia, that mid-Atlantic region, another region that's often marked by places with high property prices and high property taxes, but not necessarily, because the western part of that region is, in essence, Appalachia. So can you just talk in a big picture about regionally those economic fortunes there in that big, broad mid-Atlantic region? And I know that's difficult to do. We're still talking about a large region, but what are your thoughts with regard to the mid-Atlantic, Peter?
I don't have too much to say about that. I mean, the broader Chesapeake Bay is obviously where America started. I mean, that's the original American story. A couple thoughts, though. Number one, no matter what happens with the baby boomer retirement, it means we're going to have a larger government footprint in the economy just because there are going to be more and more people, 75 million boomers, that are now going to be on the government dime. There is no way that that can happen without a significant build out of government activity in the greater DC area. This is an area that needs to do a little retooling, but it's a retooling based upon ever higher government outlays. That is something that the city is well designed for. You move outside DC, and there's some concerns. This is an area that has not, in my opinion, proven very good at adapting policies to changes in the overall macroeconomic environment. They dealt very badly with globalization, and I don't anticipate they're going to do very well with deglobalization either. So you can have pockets that are success stories. The Navy's in the process of retooling everything it has, so the shipyards on the Chesapeake should do fine. But it's difficult for me to get too excited about anything else in the area because it's the same demographic picture as New England, without the big names like Raytheon and Harvard and MIT.
And when we think about the two regions that we just talked about, New England and the mid-Atlantic states, oftentimes we think about things like perhaps even legacy infrastructure. Does a new infrastructure bill of $1.2 trillion and all the money that's pumping in for roads and for transit, does that disproportionately help these regions or not enough or not so much?
It will disproportionately help this region, but honestly only because of the Amtrak state section. The Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic are really the only parts of the country that rely on Amtrak for anything, and so any money that goes into Amtrak is going to go into this zone. Makes sense. But everything else is spread among all 50 states, heavy on bridges, heavy on the interstates. That's going to go everywhere. So I broadly am in favor of infrastructure spending, but honestly, if all we're doing is catching up for the last 40 years of deferred maintenance, you're not talking about a big economic push here. $1 trillion of spending over a decade is not going to move the needle very much for a country with a GDP annually of 20 trillion.
Infrastructure bills are one of those rare things that can actually get some bipartisan support these days, and we sure don't have enough things that receive that. So thank goodness for that. Let's drop south one more region, not to the deep south, but more specifically to the southeast, Peter. Any particular commentary on there? So we're talking about the Carolinas and Georgia and Florida, those four states in particular?
Well, those four states have nothing in common. So let's start with Florida.
Florida should be its own region, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, nobody builds anything in Florida. Nobody manufactures anything in Florida. So this deglobalization trend, Florida is just going to get passed by completely. That doesn't mean I think Florida is in bad shape. It's still the retirement spot. And of the 75 million baby boomers, figure at least 25% of them are going to relocate. The single largest chunk of those are going to come to Florida. So if you know how to play those markets with that in mind, you're going to do great. Georgia and South Carolina, I like to consider as a unit with actually Alabama. These are the three states that are best in the country culturally for going out and getting foreign direct investment. And in a world where the global demography is tanking, but the American one is broadly stable, there are a lot of foreign companies who realize the only way they can remain in operation is to move assembly and manufacturing facilities into the United States. So the question is where? And if Alabamans and South Carolinians and Georgians go out and lay out the red carpet and actually go to Paris or Rome or Seoul or Tokyo and explain why it's the perfect spot and are willing to change things about their systems in a way that people in Pennsylvania would never even consider, well, then it comes here. So whether it's Charleston, Atlanta, Mobile, Montgomery, or Birmingham, I see just a huge amount of industrial expansion in all of these spaces. And it's not the low end, it's the mid and the high end. These are the type of jobs that most Americans say that they would love to come back. It will be very different community by community. Because again, you have to get the people in the South who go out to get the investment. And if a city doesn't do that, they won't get any.
When you and I spoke a few years ago, we learned that Alabama is the #1 state for per capita foreign direct investment, something that sure might surprise a lot of people. Of course, these areas don't just cater to people that might want to move to a place that has a low cost of living, but businesses also might want to relocate there because there's a low cost of doing business or a better tax climate and so on.
And Charleston is the #1 metro for FDI.
Charleston, South Carolina, the #1 metro for foreign direct investment. That's an interesting piece.